Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Encore episode of the Psychology Talk podcast. Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoy. The Psychology Talk podcast is a unique conversation about psychology from around the globe. We bring you ideas from mental health practitioners and experts to keep you informed about the latest issues and trends. Topics include developments and research in psychotherapy and social sciences, hypnosis and mind-body treatments, meditation and spirituality, and new treatment modalities. And while you're listening, please take a moment to subscribe and give us a review at your favorite streaming site. It helps us to grow and further reach people with quality programming. And now, here's the episode.
Welcome back to the Psychology Talk podcast. This is Kyle Miller, your host. And today on this episode, we have Michael Scott Kimmel. And Michael Scott Kimmel is a retired sociologist and a current professional speaker specializing in gender studies. He was a distinguished professor of sociology at Stony Brook University in New York and is the founder and editor of the academic journal Men and Masculinities. Kimmel is a spokesman for the National Organization for Men Against Sexism and a longtime feminist. Michael is the author of various books on men and masculinity, including his 1996 title, Manhood in America, A Cultural History, and his most recent books, which we'll be focusing on in this episode, Angry White Men, American Masculinity at the End of an Era, and Healing from Hate, How Young Men Get Into and Out of Violent Extremism. Michael, thank you for coming on and talking to us today.
Nice to be with you, Kyle.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you about this. As we were saying before we got on, this is one of a really big interest of mine, and I'm really interested to hear more about your thoughts with our current political and societal climate, everything that's going on. So, yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit up front, if you're open to it, just your background. How did you get into studying gender and specifically men and masculinity? How did this all come about?
I was trained as a sociologist, and my PhD dissertation, which I'm sure you've read, is on 17th century French tax policy.
Oh,
yeah.
I can't say I read that. Sorry.
So it's basically literary Ambien. It can put you right to sleep. But I began to do so. So the reason that I'm saying it that way is because I wasn't academically trained in this, but I was politically engaged with these kinds of questions in the late 70s, early 1980s. When the women's movement was really beginning to articulate on college campuses and in policy arenas, and all of the people that I knew were engaged with kind of feminist questions, and here I was researching 17th century France. So I had this real split between my academic work on the one hand and my political interest. I began to work, and when I was sorry. I was teaching at UC Santa Cruz in the late 70s and writing my PhD dissertation. And a bunch of us got together, a bunch of guys got together, and we started a group called Santa Cruz Men Against Rape, where we felt like, okay, rape is a men's problem. Rape is something men do. Men have to sort of begin to take it on, begin to think about it. And so so that was my first toe dipping into this field, and I became more and more interested in gender issues, and I realized that I wanted to talk about masculinity. So then I took my historical training and my new political commitments, and by the 90s, I realized that there was really no history of American manhood. There was, library shelves are sagging with the numbers of books on the history of women in America.
Right.
In every area. But if you go to say, I'd like to see the history of masculinity, like there weren't any. Mm-hmm. So I figure, that you often write the books you want to read. And so I said, I need this book. So if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
So that's how Manhood in America actually happened. And it was the first time that I began to bring together the activist part of the work I was doing with the academic research part.
Okay. Yeah. And that's, I haven't finished that one yet, but there's a lot of really good information. And I noticed that you added on to the end. You did a revised version more recently.
So what happened? The book came out in 1996. That is to say, at the end of the first Clinton administration.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much it got great reviews, and it got very picked up in college classrooms. So the publisher said, "Hey, listen, we want to make this a college book, but we can't just end in the middle of the Clinton administration." So a second edition came out, 10 years later, in 2006, and now we're up to the second Bush administration, and then I decided to do another one for the Obama years. Okay. And they're going to come to me and say, we really need one on Trump, and then of course one on Biden. So
right.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Right. No, it is. And I think it's really meaningful because the information in that book still applies, right? It's the history of masculinity. So
the history of masculinity is unfolding under many editions. But the other thing is that by organizing it, as I just said to you very sort of haphazardly, by thinking about it, each of those presidents think about the different ideals of manhood that each one of them embodies.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go back to, kinder and gentler George H.W. Bush, and then Clinton with his sort of, I feel your pain, but end of welfare as we know it, to, Obama, who was so youthful. And he was the Black Kennedy in a way. He was youthful and vigorous and gave us hope for the future. And then George W. Bush has a completely different, going back to, pretending to be a Texas, chopping down trees and roping calves on his Texas ranch, when in fact he was a blue blood born and raised in Connecticut and went to Yale. I mean, all of these, and now of course you've got the Trump presidency, which is a completely Hollywood sort of reality show, sort of pretend image of masculinity.
Yes.
And you have Biden, which is like electing your grandfather.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's like electing the grandfather you like. You have two grandfathers, and one is like the blustery, fool that everybody makes fun of. Right. And then the other one is like the guy goes, he's safe, he's nice, he won't hurt anybody.
Right.
Live with this.
Yes, he's milquetoast, right?
After these 4 years, I'll take it every time.
Yes.
Right? Because the first rule of the presidency, like the first rule of being a doctor, is do no harm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We want a little bit of boring in our politics, right?
A little bit. Like, don't you, Kyle, I mean, you're a clinician, so you probably deal with people who wake up every morning and wonder what outrage happened last night that's now going to set me off and make me feel miserable and scared about the future. I'm a dad.
Yeah.
I'm scared about the future my son's going to get from my generation, what we're passing off to him. Yeah. I'm scared about the economic future. I'm scared about the environmental future. This is the source of anxiety for a lot of men.
Absolutely. And I think that segues really well into the book that we're going to focus on, the end of the era, or I'm sorry, Healing from Hate, which, there were a lot of references in that book to angry white men. It sounds like those two are dovetailed off of Angry White Men.
Yeah. So Angry White Men came out in 2013. Mm-hmm. And the name Trump didn't even appear in the book. Right. I wasn't writing about Trump. What I was writing about were the men many of whom became his followers.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about incels before they had a name. Men who murder women because they blame them for their relationship failures or their dating failures. I interviewed neo-Nazis, white supremacists, skinheads. I interviewed men's rights activists. I interviewed a whole bunch of different groups of men, asking the question, why are white men in America so angry? In 2010, when I started that book and finished it, it was published in 2013. That seemed to be a sort of an unusual question. It's not an unusual question anymore.
No, not at all.
Turn on the TV and there it is, right in front of you all the time. So that was that. So in the last chapter of that book, I interviewed guys who were hangers-on, active members of white supremacist group, white nationalist groups, neo-Nazi, white Aryan resistance, a whole bunch of different groups. And that led me to finding out that there were some organizations that were helping young men. This is the part for the clinicians out there, that were helping young men get out of the movement.
Okay.
That had been in the movement and had been getting out of it. And I said, oh my gosh, that is so inspiring. Even though I'm only a sociologist, I will also tell you, I'm the adult child of psychoanalysts.
Okay.
My mom is a retired psychoanalyst. And I used to joke that, I'm in recovery.
I was going to say, I'm sorry.
So I realized that there were some stories that I could tell about how these guys got in and how they can get out.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed something when I started talking to these guys, and it's so obvious, but I hadn't ever seen it. I thought that most of these guys on the extreme right were in the extreme right organizations because they believed in the ideas of these organizations. So the way to get them out would be logically to tell them that their ideas are empirically untrue. So I would want to say to them, this was my impulse.
Yeah.
What Hitler says on page 247 of Mein Kampf is wrong. That isn't why they're there at all.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't tell you. They've not read it. But here's what they all said. They said that they were alone, isolated, unhappy, beaten up in school, beaten up in their families. This is the part I want to come back to, so don't let me forget it.
Yeah.
How abused at home. They were lonely, scared, 12, 13-year-old boys. And along come these skinheads who say, hey, you're cool. Come hang out with us. And they had an instant family. They had brotherhood. They had family. They had companionship, camaraderie. And most important, these guys, these big, strong skinheads, validated their masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument in that book, after talking to, so I went to Sweden. There's a phenomenal program in Sweden called Exit. Job training, job placement services, group therapy for guys who want to get out of the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Sweden's a relatively small country. They have had 400 people go through that Exit program. 380 are male, 20 were female.
Okay.
And so I thought that's an amazing program. Then I found out that there was an Exit in Germany, so I went there. There was an Exit and there was an Exit program developing here in the States called Life After Hate.
Mm-hmm.
There was a group in London that was helping ex-jihadists get out of the movement. So the conclusion that I came to in doing Healing from Hate is the reason that guys go into these movements has very little to do with the ideology and a lot more to do with their experience. So if we want, as a culture, to help them get out, we can't do it by convincing them the ideology is wrong. Mm-hmm. We have to give them a place to land. We have to give them a safe place to land, a place where they can still experience their masculinity. It would help guys get out of the white supremacist movement to have job training programs more than ideological, conversion communes like the Cultural Revolution.
Right.
That what you need is people have to have jobs. They have, how these guys get out? They get out because, in some cases, because their mom or their girlfriend says, this has gone too far. You have, it's either me or them. Mm-hmm. Or, what a lot of guys said? It was when I saw my baby, my baby's face. I said, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. I got to grow up. I've got to become a man. Right. I've got to stand on my own. I don't need these guys. Mm-hmm. So if we really want to help these guys get out, that's the way to do it, is to give them a place to land. And that's, to me, so suddenly I was in the realm of, talking to people who were therapists, talking to people who were saying, yes, we can do that. We can provide a safe space for guys to explore what brought them into the movement so that they can find a way out. Mm. And these are to some very, very dark places, and they inspire me every day because they have seen some real dark stuff and they've experienced some really terrible stuff. I guess it's the biggest surprise for me when I wrote Healing from Hate was the extent to which these young men had experienced childhood abuse. It shocked me. I'm not talking about sexual abuse here. I am talking about physical abuse by their moms, by their dads, most often by their stepfathers, by bullies in school. They had no one. I talked to guys who were getting pummeled every day when their stepdad would come home drunk. Every night would beat them up. Sometimes they would be beating up their mom, and the guys would just jump in and intervene, and take the blows for her. I mean, I'm not naive, but I was unaware of the extent of physical abuse of young boys in our society.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how much permission there is for it.
Right. Yeah. I think you even mentioned it in the book. I remember reading that we ignore the men and what happens to men in their childhood. We don't really talk about it. And it's not something, I think we're also kind of conditioned as men to kind of keep it under wraps, right? Because that's a part of your masculinity, is to push through and not have that affect you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that came up for me that came up multiple times in the book was you talked about how that we needed to add gender as a part of the conversation. So you use this term, gendered political psychology, because you said that all of the other researchers, when it came to this topic, talked about the people or the individuals, right? It was, and ignored the fact that are there actually statistics about how many are men versus women in the groups?
Well, the groups are overwhelmingly male.
Right.
The further out you go, the further to extreme you go on the extreme right, the more male it gets.
Okay.
More mainstream right-wing organizations, the more traditional ones like the Klan, or the more spontaneous political movements like the Tea Party, they have a large number of women involved. But the further out you go, the militias and the Proud Boys, and then you start getting far more gender skewing.
Okay.
And what I was trying to say is this. It's very simple. If you look at the traditional explanations of the extreme right, you will get very smart and quite accurate, good analysis of the different impact of globalization and global neoliberal economics on different class groups. So which are the groups that have been most hurt? Non-college educated males, training for jobs, not necessarily in union protected manufacturing, small business, like, the Miller and Sons, carpentry shop.
Right.
the ma and pa store that had to close because of Walmart, the small farmer who inherited the farm from his grandfather, from his father, from his father, from his father, and then it gets foreclosed. So you would get the analysis of these guys through political economy. You would get it through the changes in the global economy, changes in technology, the rise of the internet, the rise of consumer culture, the rise of information society, for which these guys are not well prepared.
Yeah.
So that's right. But it misses one important thing, which is so many of the people who feel themselves to have been pushed aside by by these changes are men who had expected to inherit the farm, who were the sons in the Miller and Son shop, and that was their legacy, that was their entitlement, to me that's really important, that those are men, and they feel like they've lost something.
Right. And so what I'm hearing from you is that, and you even said in the book that you found like your empathy for them. I can't remember the last line of the book when they said that I'm a better man because I was a Nazi, and you said I have a hard time hearing that, but they're right. I would love to hear your experience, because it sounds like you've had a lot of conversations and you've sat down with these men and talked to them, and you have to overcome some of your own anger and frustration and hurt and all of that in order to feel the empathy that you're talking about. And I wonder if you can help us understand, because I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, how hard would it be to not be angry at these people and not want to hear what they have to say.
I hear you. Thank you for saying that about the empathy in the book. A lot of the reviewers pointed that out as well. And I felt like it was really important for me to say, especially in Healing from Hate, to talk a little bit, as I do in the very beginning of the book and at the end, of my own process with these guys. Mm-hmm. And, and it is interesting for me, being American, I'm Jewish. And none of the guys I talked to here in the States, could miss it. Everybody knew, okay. Just listen to my voice and, unless you think every American sounds like Jerry Seinfeld, you know that I'm Jewish. So that's the first thing. But none of the Europeans did. Because as far as they're concerned, they can't really tell different accents. I mean, if you were in England, you really probably couldn't tell a Yorkshire accent from a Manchester accent. Yeah, because but I felt that I had to deal with the rage that I felt. One of the guys I profiled in the book, a guy who I came to really like very much. Is a guy who had a big swastika tattooed on his neck at one point. He's of course spent a lot of money. He actually had a Jewish philanthropy that actually contributed so that he could have his tattoos removed.
Oh wow!
He spends his time now going to temples and talking to youth groups about what it was like to be a Holocaust denier and now how he feels about it. I mean, these people. So in one sense, Kyle. I felt like a lot of the rage that I would have felt, I felt like they had already dealt with it. They'd already gone through.
Right.
And they were 10, 20 years out. That's the first, that's the first thing. But the second thing is, as a therapist, I suspect that you often have come from a place of empathy toward your patients, toward your clients. Because that a cardinal rule of therapy is you don't tell someone their feelings are wrong.
Right.
Your feelings are real. You're feeling them. The question is not whether or not they're real. It's whether or not they're actually true, which is to say, are your feelings an accurate assessment of your situation? Right? Feelings are there. So I wasn't there telling him, well, you feel this way and you're wrong. These guys that I talk to, they have been screwed. They have been dealt a bad hand.
Mm-hmm.
They have been pushed aside and with absolute contempt. So what I wanted to say is, you're right to feel angry, but you're delivering your mail to the wrong address.
Mm.
You think LGBT people are responsible for climate change? You think immigrants are responsible for the fact that your company downsized you? Absolutely not. You think feminist women, are responsible for wage stagnation? The reality is, you're right to be angry. And I feel that. And but I felt like they are fed a steady diet of Rush Limbaugh and Hannity telling them that their feelings really are right. And these are the reasons why they feel the way they do.
Right.
And so my job was to simply say, I think we can do better than this. I think we can say to them, you know what? You're right to feel pissed off. You have been screwed by this system.
Mm-hmm.
But so now let's see, let's survey the landscape and see who else has gotten screwed by this system. Oh my, immigrants, women, LGBT people. Let's make an alliance with them.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess my mind goes to the people who haven't gotten out, right? It wasn't necessarily, I think there's an automatic, empathy for people who see the woes of their ways, right? Yeah. And I was thinking about, like, how do we reach those? And I think you outlined some of that, the ways that people do exit, right? There was, throughout the book, you're talking about the different ways that everyone exits. And so in my mind, I keep thinking about, how can we as mental health professionals, and just as people in society, anyone who would be listening to this, how can we prepare ourselves to, if we do encounter anyone, how can we support someone in seeing the light or seeing a different perspective?
Well, here's where being a researcher and being a therapist might be different. Because when I interviewed the guys who were actives, who were still involved in it,
mm-hmm.
I wasn't there to change their minds. I wasn't, my opening gambit with them, in a sense, was to say, look, I am a New York, Brooklyn, Jewish sociologist. I'm your worst nightmare. There's no way I can understand the world as you see it. And that's why I'm here. Because since I can't understand it, I need you to explain it to me. I'm not going to convince you of my worldview, and you're not going to convince me of yours.
Right.
But I need to understand it. I got a lot of guys to agree to talk to me, and there were guys who wouldn't. And so there were, for me, those kinds of moments that might be sort of, humorous or familiar to you, like moments when you can put together something that the person who's speaking to you is saying, mm-hmm. and you want so desperately to sort of give them the answer. But like I'll give you one example. This is I was talking to a woman who had been involved with the neo-Nazi skinheads in Stockholm. And I asked her, she was one of the few women who had gone through the program, and I asked her why she joined up, why she became a skinhead. And she said her older sister was dating this Iraqi immigrant in Sweden, and he beat her up. And he hit her, and he was violent against her. And she said, and I just said, these immigrants, they've got to go. I joined up with an anti-immigrant group. Wait, so then she says, so I said, okay, so how'd that work out for you? So why did you leave? And she said, she said, it didn't really work out so well. My boyfriend was a skinhead, and, he was pretty, abusive toward me. And then he wanted to pass me around to all his friends. And And so I decided I'd had enough. And at that moment, I'm like, a listener to your show would have to, I'm pinching my fingers together. I'm this close to saying, there's a theory that would connect what happened to your sister to what happened to you. It's called feminism. You feel the words forming in your mouth, but you can't say it because I'm sitting there with my pen going, oh, really? That's interesting, because I'm not going to engage with them in a way to try to move them. I really want to hear their story.
Right.
And so they're the researcher and the therapist part ways, I think.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting part of it as a therapist, we're not there to dictate people's views, or we're there to help them, think about their thinking and help them to, is this getting you to where you want to be, right? Like, it's. I think we're actually somewhat similar in that way. I was thinking more in a broad sense, because if I take off my therapist hat, I'm like, wow, this is just such an unhappy place to be. And it's such a destructive way to live your life. Right. Yeah. So, and yet we know that, in our society, when we think about, there are people that are angry at the neo-Nazi skinheads. There are people that are angry at Black Lives Matter. There are people that are angry at all these different factions, right? There's people that are angry at Trump. There are people that are angry at Biden, right? Like and so how, my mind just goes to how do we step back and actually take that more wise view and open view and try to help make change.
We've never needed therapists more than we do now. Mm-hmm. Level of anger is so intense. People are exploding at each other on airplanes and in art museums.
Yeah.
No matter where you go, it's really. So I don't think we've ever needed, and just turning the volume down doesn't address the pain that's causing that anger.
Right.
So. That's the thing I feel like when I work in workplaces. I do a lot of work with companies about, sort of promoting gender equality. And one of the things that I find is like, for decades, women were saying, this isn't working for us. There's discrimination against us and et cetera. And so now, so they said, okay, let's implement all these policies. And women are still saying it's still not, we still discriminate against it, still all these problems. But now men are saying it's not working for us either. It's like, it's not working for anybody.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this is the moment when we've got to recalibrate. Just turning the volume down is like dealing with a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
We're angry because we have so many platforms from which to speak, and we feel no one's really listening.
Right. Yeah.
And any therapist will tell you, well, that's probably channeling something from your childhood about what you wanted to say and what you wanted to be, how you wanted to be heard, weren't. I mean, and these guys, I have to tell you, these guys are so eloquent about that.
Mm.
They would really, I found some of their stories really moving about how they survived the kind of abuse that they experienced. And some of them is just, your sort of standard everyday bullying, and then I think this is, Angry White Men has a chapter on angry white boys, about all the school shooters. Mm-hmm. And they profile, beat up, bullied, gay bashed, gay baited every single day. And I'm not just talking about, guys sort of saying nasty stuff to you. I'm talking about them like driving past you in their pickup truck and throwing Coke bottles at you. I'm talking about getting locked into a school locker every morning, having your homework trashed every single day.
Yeah.
And being told, like you read these stories, these stories about these young teenagers, especially teenage girls who are, who are driven to suicide because they everybody hates them. That's what they believe. They're worthless. I think parents in schools are often either oblivious to it or because it's happening on social media or, we don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it sounds like just in talking to the men that you did, hearing their background and hearing their history gives you an understanding of how they got to the point where they needed, you think about inner city gangs or, not just inner city, anywhere. It's this need to feel like you are part of something, to feel like you have some power, to feel like you are connected. And one of the big things that you brought up that just struck me was men need to display their masculinity to other men. It's not about pleasing the women or, impressing women as much as it is that another man validates your masculinity.
Yeah. That was the biggest surprise to me when I did Manhood in America, when I wrote that book. I had gone in with the kind of, sort of basic, naive psychological insight that men do all this posturing to get women's attention. And then I started reading about all these books about, what it means to be a man in 1850 and so son, you're going off to the big city. Here's what you'll need to know, and rules for making your way in the world and all. And every one of them was about other men evaluating you. You want to be a man's man. You want to be a man among men. Think for a minute of the difference between a man's man and a lady's man, right? The difference in terms of masculinity. Women in that model almost become a currency that men use to evaluate the manhood of other men. You want other men to see you. And I'll give you just two really good, quick examples of this sort of man's, the difference between a man's man and a lady's man. Okay, so I'm going to give you an image of two men who have the exact same body type, the exact same physicality, the exact same musculature, big, strong, powerful, unbelievably, their biceps are larger than your thighs. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Fabio.
Oh.
Right? Which is the real man? Right? We one is a ladies' man and one is a man's man. Same body. Right? And here's the thing. I mean, I'm sure you know this is a little factoid from the world of cosmetic surgery and urology. There's a procedure, a cosmetic surgery procedure called penile enhancement surgery. It's for men who believe that their penises are too small, and too small by some standard. It's relative, obviously. So again, I ask my students, so why would a man get surgery, which is actually a complicated procedure? It's actually quite, there's 30, 40,000 men a year have this surgical procedure. Why would they have that? And of course, the answer that my students would give me is the answer that anyone in the, would say, oh, because they want to be better, better sexually with women. Turns out that's not the reason at all. The cosmetic surgeons who actually perform penile enhancement surgery talk about locker room syndrome, because the men are ashamed to get undressed and take a shower in a locker room in front of other men. Not be more graphic in the understanding that our manhood is measured by other men's evaluation of us. This is, I think, how we learn to be men. Yeah. You learn to be a man in a way there's kind of like an adolescent thing, you do something and somebody says, oh, you faggot, or that's so gay. And you go, oh, I can't do that anymore. All right, I won't do that anymore. And that's how you learn. When I was in middle school, we had this little trick that we played, we guys. We would sneak up behind a guy on the playground. Now, of course, we're doing this on radio, so I'm gonna have to describe this. But we would sneak up behind a guy and say, "Look at your fingernails." Now, Kyle, do you know what I'm talking about here? If you curl your fingers toward you to look at your fingernails, you're fine. But if you hold your palm away from you to look at your fingernails, that's girly, and you have license then to punch him.
Oh, wow.
So now, and think about all the different ways that you are policed by other guys. how you walk, how you talk, how you cross your legs, how you move, how you dress, how you look at your goddamn fingernails.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you do is being policed by other guys. That's what I'm talking about when I say masculinity is homosocial.
Yeah.
Right? Even heterosexual masculinity is homosocial. We perform masculinity for the evaluation of other men. Right.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It makes me think, like, the aggressiveness of these groups is, and like you talked about the aggressive music, why that's such a draw. Do you feel like if these men were given the nurturing and guidance and boundaries by their parents growing up, and if society didn't treat them in this way, would that make a difference? Or do you feel like it would kind of go, maybe not go as extreme, but would this still be happening?
That's a really good question. The book that we didn't end up talking about, my one bestseller, is called Guyland, and it's about young men 16 to 26. And at the end of that book, I talk about what predicts resilience in boys.
Okay.
Given the pressures that we're describing, given the amount of sort of performance anxiety that guys have about being a man, manning up, being strong, being powerful, all of those things, what enables a boy to make it through, right? To be resilient. And it turns out that there are three things that psychologists point to that predict resilience in boys. So in a sense, if I were a clinician, I would be thinking to myself, how can I support my client in the development of these resources? One of these resources is the charismatic adult, right? Not necessarily a parent, but it could be. It could be an uncle. It could be a teacher. It could be a coach. You have no idea how many young guys talk about their coaches, both in positive and negative ways.
Sure.
It could be a minister, a priest, a rabbi. It could be an uncle, a grandfather. Very often it's a teacher. For me, it was a teacher, actually. And who some grown up who sees you, who gets you, who sees behind the mask, right? That's the first thing. The second thing that predicts resilience is actually a good male friend. One friend, not a bro, but friend who has your back, who you can let down your guard, who you can be honest with, who you can stop performing with. While we were on this conversation, I got a text from my version of that, my best friend since 6th grade, and that he just got home from the hospital. He had a hip replacement. So, I will call him when we are done with this conversation.
Okay.
We've been each other's go-to person through everything. And then the third thing that predicts resilience is a good girlfriend. And by the way, I'm going to tell you, this is why I'm so optimistic. A girlfriend, not a girlfriend, a girl who is a friend, who validates your, if you're heterosexual, validates your heterosexuality. You are an interesting boy. We're friends, but I can see why girls would like you.
Right.
Who helps you in that arena, but also with whom you can also get validation of your masculinity from a girl. If you have those three things, you are going to do fine. If you have the charismatic adult, a good male friend and a good female friend, it seems to me that's not that big a lift.
No. Right?
Teachers can be helping out in this way. Parents can be helping. It takes a village, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that there's that, and one of the reasons I'm so sanguine about the future when I look at my own son, who's now 21, and a senior in college. I know that's impossible to believe, but he has had girls who are his friends since he was in pre-K, and he has never and his whole generation, they all have good friends of the opposite sex. This is the biggest change in young people's lives. I don't know if you have kids. This is the biggest change in young people's lives. Anybody who's listening to us right now knows if they have kids that they have cross-sex friends. And now ask your parents if they had good friends of the opposite sex. Hardly any.
Right.
Such an enormous change. And that makes me very hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up because it makes sense. You know, having an adult outside of your immediate family who takes an interest in you and sees past, you know, any image or whatever that's being put out. But all of three of these feel like they have a level of vulnerability in them, right? Like someone who gets you and you can let your guard down with.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I'll tell you, the guy, this is it's a sweet story. The guy who was my charismatic adult was a professor at my university, my freshman year writing class. And I came in, I was going to be an English major, a writer. I've always been a writer. I knew I was and I thought I was hot. I thought I was really great. And he ripped my work to shreds. And I was furious with him. I thought, like, you don't see my genius. You're an awesome writer. And he would tear it down. And he says, just because you have a facility, he said to me once, like, look, really good writing takes a lot of discipline, you know. And I thought, but I wrote this, you know, I just sat down and wrote this. He said, yeah. And now you have something to work with. Now you have to work on it. Now you have to make it better. You have to revise it and revise it. And I hated it.
Yeah.
He worked me over because what he saw was not what I was putting down on paper, but what I could be putting down on paper.
Right.
That I had potential. And he took it seriously. So he and I lost touch. I transferred to another school. I graduated. I moved on with my career. But as I was writing this book, now I graduated from college in 1972, and I wrote Guyland it came out in 2008. So 30-something years later, I tracked him down. I wrote about it in the book, and I tracked him down. And I said, I'm sending you a copy of the book. Take a look at page 183, you know. And I said, I'm sure you have no idea who I am. You don't remember me at all, but you made a big impact on me, and I want to thank you. He writes back this beautiful letter saying, oh my gosh, of course I remember you. I talk about you all the time. I followed your career. I'm so proud of, you know, the work you do.
Yeah.
It was so nice.
That's great.
And I think we thank people for that sort of stuff too seldom in our lives.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to, if you had someone like that, to really kind of honor it, right? Really acknowledge it and validate it.
You had that.
Absolutely. I did. And I had, I think I definitely had the charismatic adult in my life. And there is something that is, especially if it's not in your family, because sometimes you think your family is just kind of blowing smoke, right? But
they have to say,
right. Yeah. They have to say that. But that adult that you look up to, when it's not only I see you, but it's I see you and I see your potential, and I see who you really are, not sometimes this facade that men put out, right? I see past that as well, right? One of the things also that hit me is I found myself when I was reading the book, I'm like, okay, all these stories are great. All the information's great, but I want to know, like, when I got to the epilogue, I was like, here it is, you know, like the doors opened, and, the African proverb that you wrote, the quote at the end, if the young are not initiated into the village, they will burn it down just to feel its warmth. That talks about so many of the movements that are happening right now. And you're right. There are all these platforms, and there are people that are so many people are desperate to be heard. And you hit it on the head. They feel like no one is listening.
It's so true. I cannot tell you how many of these guys I talked to, both the active guys and the formers, how many of them, said, everybody, they treat us like we're nothing, like, with such contempt. And sometimes, it's the liberal elites who treat us this way. It's the companies that treat us this way. I remember when I was little, my grandfather worked for a big company. He was a salesman.
Mm-hmm.
Every year, the whole company had a big picnic. They rented out this whole park, and they had this big softball game. And the CEO of the company was the pitcher on one of the teams. And it was like, and they made people feel like they belonged, like they mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys now, and that's exactly what they say all the time, is nobody cares about us. Nobody pays any attention to us. Nobody listens to us. And that's why I said earlier, somewhat flippantly, but I don't mean it in a flip way at all. We need therapists, because that's your job, is to begin that process of, I finally feel listened to.
Right.
Now I can move.
Right.
Unless you feel listened to, you cannot move.
Right.
You are stuck there. You'll burn the village down to feel the warmth.
Absolutely. Yeah. And metaphorically or really, right? Or literally, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm keeping one eye on the time, and I know, and I really do appreciate your time. And this has gone, I think that the information that we've talked about is really useful. And I think that anyone listening to this can get a lot of ideas on how to understand. Of course, I recommend that anyone read your books, because you really do a good job of helping easily to read, perspective on how to understand men and masculinity. And it's not judging a particular brand of masculinity. It's just talking about what is and how we got to where we are, and, all of the impacts of that. Even in this, healing from hate, you even made it clear in the beginning that this is not a judgment of any of the people involved. It's to help us understand.
Well, I think that's the first, for me as a sociologist, as a writer, as a researcher, it was important for me to honor the journeys that these guys had actually been on.
Yeah.
They were in a place of real darkness, and they came to a place of, they found their way to the light. They found it.
Mm-hmm.
And, to me, I want to, respect that. I think that that's really important, and it's an important lesson for us. We can learn from that. We can learn from them. So I felt like I wanted to tell their stories in a way, that would provide some kind of understanding for others.
Yeah. And that's great. And I'm wondering, did that feeling for you happen over time? Was it immediate when you sat down and started interviewing for previous books, or?
It happened the first time I sat down with the guy who said I'm a better man for having been a Nazi, and sat down with him and another guy in the offices of Exit in Stockholm. These guys had been out of the movement for 15 years each, and they were the organizers, and they were running the program at Exit. And I got back to my hotel after this. I had spent the afternoon with them. I got back to my hotel, and I called my wife, and I said, I like these guys. This is really unsettling. This guy told me I'm a better man for having been a Nazi, and I'm telling you, I like him.
Yeah.
What? Who am I? I felt like the whole gyroscope was off its axis.
Right.
I to hate them. I was supposed to feel superior to them. I was supposed to be, I'm the smart researcher. These are the guys who got missed, who were led like sheep into this. And I felt like it had completely pulled the rug out from under me. I knew who you were, and I don't.
Yeah.
And boy, that opened me up.
That's amazing. And that vulnerability, right? And the authenticity, it kind of draws you in.
Yeah. If I give myself any props there, Kyle, I will say at least I was capable or open to having been thrown off my axis.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly did.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you again for coming on and talking about this. This has been a great conversation. I would love to keep going for hours, but I know we've got things that we've got to do.
Post-COVID, we'll sit down, we'll have a beer, we'll keep the conversation going.
That sounds good. Absolutely. We'll make sure that happens. Is there anything that you would like our audience to know? Anything coming up for you? Is there any way that they can contact you if they would like to either have you come out and speak or Zoom?
On my website.
Okay.
MichaelKimmel.com.
Okay. Great.
All right.
Michael. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know you can find us on the web all over the place? Well, maybe not all over the place, but you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, loads of places. Please look for us, and if you can, subscribe, like us, leave us a review, send us a comment, a criticism. Hey, we like to hear a lot from people. Go ahead, talk to us. That's why we're here. By the way, this is just a reminder to let you know that all of the material here is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you do need a therapist or a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.